welcome back to the ShrikeCast. My name is Andrew Crouthamel, and today we are going to go over some VPN troubleshooting and best practices for how I end up configuring Ike and IPsec site-to-site VPN tunnels and things like that. So I am on the TZ100 on the live demo site again, so you can go along and follow along with what's going on here. And what we're going to do is add a VPN tunnel and just see what's in here. We've seen this before in this basic site-to-site tunnel video, and so we're going to put in some dummy information here. Alright, we'll leave it like that. So here's just a real quick site-to-site VPN. I didn't fill out everything, but we'll just use it for reference. If we look at this VPN here on the proposal side, I have main mode selected as well as some other options for our VPN. Main mode, aggressive mode, and Ike V2 are our three main options for our exchange. This is something you have to take into consideration depending on what device is upstream from your SonicWALL and depending on what kind of service you have from your internet provider. And this is something that I see come up quite a bit as people change internet providers and they don't tell their firewall management provider, or they have problems with a new modem that gets put in place in front of the SonicWALL, or someone goes in and changes something and a new administrator doesn't really know the different options and why you would use one over the other. In this example we're using main mode. So what that means is with main mode you have to have a static IP, or with the SonicWALL you can also have a dynamic DNS name, which is in another video I did, in the general tab here for your IPsec primary gateway name or IP address. So you have to have some other static address of some kind, either DNS name or an actual IP, in order to do a main mode tunnel. When you do a main mode tunnel, make sure you have your local and peer Ike IDs set to IP address. You have to use IP address, or sometimes you can use keys and things like that, but from a basic perspective, make sure it's set to IP. If you have it set to something such as firewall identifier, if it used to be something else, if it was set to a different mode and you had it set for firewall identifier, or in the older OS it was called SonicWALL identifier. If you have something in here such as my firewall, whatever the name is it might be, other firewall, if you have it set up in this way and you're using firewall identifier strings as your Ike IDs and you have a proposal set for main mode, it's not going to work. It just straight up will not work. If you look in your logs, you'll see phase 1 failing. You'll have problems with the tunnel right off the bat. A lot of people don't realize that. They think that they can set the first tab however they wish and then just choose amongst the proposals, and whatever ends up making it work is good enough. I have that attitude with a lot of new administrators who are starting out with SonicWALLs, or just security in general, is they don't really understand that each of these exchanges, they're not interchangeable in such a way that you can just select one or the other and it'll just all work and be fine. There's reasonings behind each of these things. So if you're using main mode, make sure you have it set to an IP address. If you leave it blank, it'll use whatever is entered into here for the primary secondary gateway address and whatever the public address is for the SonicWALL you're using, or you can specify something as well for each side. So that's my first tip. If you're using main mode, make sure you're using IP address. That's probably the biggest thing that comes up. Also, if you have a SonicWALL specifically, if you're using main mode note that you can change your groups, your encryption settings, whatever you want to change here, and make it however you wish, and it'll be fine. It doesn't matter if they based on the default settings on either side, and this will make more sense when we look at Ike V2. But for main mode, you can set it to anything. As long as it matches on the other side, all these options will work. As long as the other side has group 5 and it has AES 256, it'll work fine. So now let's talk a little bit about aggressive mode. If we have it set to aggressive mode, we can also select our DH group, our encryption level, our authentication protocol, however we wish. It's one of probably the nice things about Phase 1, Ike V1 in SonicWALL implementations is you can choose, as long as it matches on the other side, you can choose Phase 1 or Phase 2 proposal options however you wish, and it'll work. Although, note that if you go back to the General tab, you can use now anything for your Ike ID. You could use an IP address if you wanted. You could statically choose something. It doesn't even have to be a routable IP on the internet. You could make it a private IP. 1918 RFC IP address is quite fine as long as both sides are configured the same way and they're going to understand that the other side is presenting it with a private IP instead of a public. I have some that do that. But you can also use firewall identifier name. So if, as in with the other videos that I've shown, you can have a name here. So depending on your UFI, your unique firewall identifier of your SonicWALL, you can have this set to a name of some sort. Normally I have it related to the customer's name and their state and some identifying number about the customer number, something like that. So it could be, Bob's store in Maryland and his customer number is there 01234. So that might be his customer number. And then the other side would be, main location. And then that's in DC. Something like that. So you can use a name on each side. And since it's using aggressive mode, that means that the one side is going to try and bring up the VPN to the other side. Usually I do it from the remote location to the main location because the remote location might be dynamic. They have that cheaper connection. They might not be using dynamic DNS. Kind of depends on their setup. And in that case where you have a dynamic aggressive mode tunnel, most of the time you'll want to use a firewall ID. That's what I end up using 99% of the time. So here's where you can see how someone might be in aggressive mode tunnel and they might be set up in this way, but then let's say they decide to upgrade their internet provider's connection to a static address, and then another admin at your company comes in and says, okay, that's good, so they're okay now, they've got a static IP, I'm changing this to main mode, and then boom, okay, click, done. And now the tunnel's down and they can't figure out why. You have to change it to IP address and blank out what's in here. This Ike ID area becomes very important as you get into changing your proposals and you start upgrading your proposals. I did a project not long ago of hundreds of changes to different VPNs for their proposal settings. We upgraded hundreds of them from triple DES to AES of various flavors, and that's part of it. I spent half my time in there changing Ike IDs so that it was compatible with the new settings. Now if we were to choose Ike V2, I've mentioned this in I think my best practices and at least the site-to-site VPN tunnel video. If you use Ike V2, it's a little bit different from main mode and aggressive mode Ike V1 implementation in SonicWALL. With Ike V2, if you have a static IP on each side, it behaves like a main mode tunnel. If you have a dynamic IP on one side, it behaves like an aggressive mode tunnel. And that's one of the nice things with Ike V2. I love it. I posted a blog post about that on my website on my love for Ike V2 and why it's wonderful. But the problem is, at least in the SonicWALLs, is with Ike V2, you have to know that first off, and also, if you have a dynamic IP on one side, you end up needing to change your dynamic proposal settings for Ike V2 in a different location, and sometimes this will be grayed out, the DH group the encryption and the authentication might be grayed out if it were dynamic in our configuration here. And you might say, well, where is that? How do I change that? Why is that? You'll have to go into the advanced settings, and then at the bottom there's that dynamic client proposal button, which is the dynamic quote aggressive mode default proposal options for an Ike V2 tunnel. So I'm pretty sure in my best practices video I mentioned that, to go in there and bump it up to group 5 AES or group 14 if you so desire. Bump it up to something higher quality, higher encryption, so that if you have a dynamic tunnel down the road, you don't have to change a bunch of them all at once. If you forget to do that, you can just go in, set it the first time you configure your SonicWALL, and then from then on, any dynamic Ike V2 tunnels you create will use whatever's configured in here, will use the higher encryption. So that's one other tip I have for you. I get a lot of questions about that as to, why is Ike V2 different, and how do I configure it properly and it's not doing what I want. That's one of the things you can do. Also with Ike V2 I like to use the firewall identifiers most of the time, just in case they switch from a static to a dynamic or back and forth. It doesn't make as much configuration changes for me down the road. I can just tweak a few things and off we go. So let's talk about why you might use one type of VPN connection over the other. You might have a problem where someone comes in, Comcast comes in, and they give them a new modem or something like that. Let's say they go from DSL to Comcast. That's a good change. They went from a DSL connection to a cable connection. So say they switch from Verizon to Comcast. Not only are you going to have to go into your network settings and change it from PPPoE if you had it set up for bridge mode and things like that, but you're now behind another NAT device. You're doing network address translation in front of the SonicWALL as well as within the SonicWALL itself. So there's certain options in your VPN settings that you're not going to be able to do. You can't use all of them. So if we go in and add a VPN, if you previously, with that DSL connection you were using, had a main mode tunnel set up, maybe it was a static DSL connection or something like that, that would not work necessarily behind a NAT device, such as a business class Comcast modem, one of those SMCs that they've put out pretty much across the country. Why that would not work is because if you were using main mode, the Ike ID, if you're using IP address, if you don't have this set here and you're using main mode, it's going to use your WAN IP, as I mentioned. So what's going to happen if you went from from a public address on your DSL that you used to have now to 10.1.10. something behind your SMC Comcast modem now? Well, when it tries to create that tunnel to the peer address, which you might have configured up here, 8.8.8.8 or whatever it is, it's going to send its Ike packets out there, try to create the VPN, but then it's going to say, hey, 8.8.8.8, my Ike ID is 10.1.10. whatever it might be, 2, something like that. And then the other side is going to say, well, that's not what I have here. That doesn't make any sense, and it's not going to come up. You're going to say, well, why is that? That's why. Because you're behind. You are behind a NAT device. Now, how could you fix that? You could use, potentially, a main mode tunnel in that such situation. You would have to, on the other side, do exactly what I'm doing here. If we're on the remote side and the other side has a Comcast connection at 10. something, we could easily type in whatever local private IP address they have on their WAN port and put that in as the peer ID at the remote side. So then we are expecting that RFC 1918 address to come through as the Ike identifier. Or you could change it to a firewall ID and not use main mode, which is usually what I do. In that case, you could also use Ike V2. And as I mentioned, Ike V2 works as aggressive or main mode, so it makes life a lot easier. You could have it set as a firewall identifier with Ike V2, and you could bounce between DSL or cable without an issue. You could bounce between a bridged modem to a NAT modem with no issues. What else could also come up? Let's say you're behind a NAT device and you can't do a DMZ to your SonicWALL. How do you get your VPNs to come up? If you are behind a NAT device, that NAT device needs to do port forwarding or DMZ to your SonicWALL in order for the ports necessary for a VPN for it to come up. So how do we get that to work? If we can't DMZ it for whatever reasons there might be at that location, how do we get that to work? What you need to know, what you need to know is for Ike and IPsec, there's a slew of ports that are used that people don't realize, and people get confused between ports and protocol numbers and things like that. There's a lot of misinformation as to what you really need to forward. So let's say we are on this firewall here and we're behind a NAT device. We are behind a Comcast modem and our WAN IP is set to a private address, 10.1.10.2. What ports are we going to need to forward in from that Comcast modem in order for people from the outside to bring up a VPN tunnel to us without us having to bring it up to them first? So what we need to do is know that when you're talking about NAT traversal in Ike, it changes its port. So by default, Ike uses UDP 500, and I'll bring that down here. It uses UDP 500. If you have a bridged modem in front of your SonicWALL, or a bridged router, whatever, you're going to be using UDP 500, and it's going to be a standard connection, no problem. Well, the original Ike is rather old. The original IPsec specification, the original Internet Key Exchange protocol, the RFCs out there are quite old. That was before NAT really became a big thing. So they didn't account for that. So once NAT came out, they added on an RFC to the original Ike specification that said, okay, well now we got to figure out how to get through a NAT device. And they decided that when you go through a NAT device, your port is going to change. So we're going to use UDP still, but now we're using 4500. So as we go through a NAT device, in the exchange there, it's going to request the other side use 4500. So if you don't have that forwarded through, there's a possibility, depending on the device and what kind of inspections it's doing, that won't work. So if you have something like that come up, make sure you know that you use the right ports. Another thing I see that comes up is people say, oh, you also need to forward ports 50, 51, and some others, and that'll make your VPNs come up. That's not true. 50 is a protocol number. It's not a port number. So do not use anything related to that. The ports that you actually need are 500 and 4500. Also, I mentioned this in the other remote access VPN video, but some other ports that you might find useful: 443 if you're doing remote HTTPS management, 4433, and let's see what else here. 4433 is being for SSL VPN, and maybe SNMP or something like that. That should be about it, though. Other things that you can run into, besides the dynamic Ike V2 issues, where you have to go in and find that secret location where they specify the Ike V2 dynamic proposal settings, and besides your main mode, I've found issues where some devices don't like Ike V2. I've had a few of them over the past few years where the upstream router has some sort of inspection turned on that's not possible to be turned off, that doesn't like Ike V2, or it doesn't like main mode as well for some reason. I haven't figured out why for some of them, but I found that aggressive mode gets around some of those issues. So if you're having problems getting your VPN to work and you've worked with the vendors and you can't figure out why it's not working, there's no other reasons why, try changing it to aggressive mode even though it's the older, less desirable version of Ike, and it's also the less desirable mode of Ike, it gets through in ways that it doesn't always work. Also, I've noted that aggressive mode works in a lot of situations where you're behind, you have a SonicWALL, you're at a small location, they have a very cheap internet connection, they have the basic router, nothing fancy, dynamic IP, and for some reason they don't know how what the login is for their modem or something like that. They can't get in, so you can't configure anything. So what you end up doing is you'll hook in the SonicWALL. You'll plug the WAN up to their modem. Hopefully you won't have an IP conflict between the two networks. But beyond that, how do you get a VPN tunnel to work from that location to somewhere else if you don't have any access to the upstream router? If that sort of situation comes up, use aggressive mode. You can have, if this is the remote location, we can go in and specify main store, or wherever we're going, and their IP address. Change it to a firewall ID. Give it a secret. Make sure it uses aggressive mode, and then turn on Keep Alive. So then what that'll do is cause this SonicWALL to constantly try to bring up a tunnel every few seconds to the other location through the upstream NAT router. So what this will do is it'll try to go through as an established connection through the upstream router. And most of the consumer-based routers and modems out there will allow all outbound communications and allow only return traffic to established TCP connections through there. So what we can do is sometimes fool the upstream router to allowing us to create a VPN where it might not work otherwise. The only problem though with this is that if you have an upstream device that you don't have access to and you can't do port forwards or a DMZ or anything like that, you're not going to be able to have the other location create a VPN to here. So that's one thing to note, that if you have problems with that, you're kind of stuck. You have to have the site that is behind the unconfigurable NAT modem create the VPN to the main location, which is hopefully configured correctly, and it can kind of phone home every few seconds with the Keep Alive and try to bring up that tunnel for you. I have hundreds of them set up this way, and it does work. It's just not perfect because you can't create the tunnel both ways. So you're relying on one side to always bring it up. So you will have more issues, but with the newer firmware, it's not as bad. That's one thing that I've run into quite a bit. Other things you might want to turn on to make your troubleshooting easier is through these VPNs, enable some sort of management for your SonicWALL, so that if you're at one location and you're trying to fix the SonicWALL at another location, but that other location doesn't have the port forward set up correctly, well, how do you get to your SonicWALL? You can get to it through the VPN by making sure your management is enabled for that security association. Some other troubleshooting things on that advanced tab there. If you're using Windows file sharing or something like that, you turn on NetBIOS read broadcasting. That might make your life easier. It's not perfect, but it does help on occasion. And I believe that's about it for now. If I come up with anything else, I'll bring it into another video. And next time we will continue on some other troubleshooting tips and tricks that I have for other locations within the SonicWALL firmware. So thank you, and I will see you guys next week. Please check out andrewcrouthamel.com for network and security information that I post up there on that blog, and ShrikeTools.com, which provides management security services for small and medium businesses. Thank you.